Welcome to the CXO and CHRO Walk into a Bar, where we share insights at the intersection of talent and revenue. Dive into a unique narrative with our hosts, Michelle Strasburger, the insightful CHRO, and Dominique Sanfleur, the visionary CXO. Together, they bring dynamic perspectives that ignite thought-provoking dialogue from the C-suite. Each week, join us for electrifying sessions that confront the very challenges modern CXOs navigate in today's fast-paced business landscape. When split-second decisions loom, must it be talent or revenue that takes the hit? Or is there a harmonious crossroad where both can thrive? Can we blur the lines between talent and revenue? In every episode, we provide executive leaders with 3 strategic takeaways, transformative insights that will propel you to master the delicate balance between people and profit. It's not about winners or losers, but crafting an environment where everyone triumphs. Tune in and step closer to redefining executive success.
Love it.
We are.
Here we are.
Happy Thursday.
Happy Thursday, and I really love the intro. It gets me every time.
I'm glad. It's like professional, like we've arrived.
There we go.
And hopefully we'll have an outro today. So
I encourage everybody to stay, for all of our sessions, but especially this one, to experience the outro as well. So
something new every time.
There we go. we're
each time.
We're evolving every day.
So today we are talking about culture queries, and we've got questions around culture that a CEO should be asking about culture. And why the CEO, Dominique?
The CEO owns culture. It's not HR. It's if we kind of look at who needs to set the pace, the tone, the top-down leadership, it's the CEO in all directions, not only strategy, not only vision, but also with culture. It's those 3 pillars that a CEO is really responsible for. There are some other pillars, but those are the 3. But culture is very, very critical and has to be driven by the CEO.
Absolutely. Now, early in my career, I believed it was like it has to be ground up and people have to, set the culture from the ground up. But I believe that the CEO has to set it, has to believe into it, and has to enforce it from the top.
I like that part. That enforcement part is important. So yeah, thanks for mentioning that.
Yeah. So it's a good topic. At the bar today, what are you drinking?
We're doing culture queries, which means we're going to take turns asking each other questions. We haven't seen each other's questions, so I don't know the questions you'll ask, and you don't know the questions I'll ask, but we'll take turns being the CEO, asking the questions. I'm a little nervous. I know some of the questions I have for you, Michelle, are tough. And I can only imagine the questions that you have for me are tough. So I'm going to ante it up to I'll do my classic Blue Moon, but with a tequila shot next to it. It's a, tequila shot, then sip the Blue Moon for the rest of the session. So kind of quick jolt, just kind of, calm the nerves a little bit, and then, get me ready.
I'm up here in the Northeast where we're expecting a nor'easter, and some people have said snow. Which is very strange for this time of year. And so I need to bring some sunshine and stuff. So something with an umbrella in it will be the choice. I don't care what it is. Just put an umbrella in it.
Something tropical. So like a glass of water with an umbrella.
A glass of water with an umbrella would be fantastic right about now.
I see. Okay. Well, okay. Something with something, hopefully a stronger beverage, or a strong beverage, but with umbrella. That's a good choice for a little tropical thing.
Absolutely.
Cool. So Michelle, ladies first. Feel free. We're going to take turns asking each other questions. The floor is yours first. You'll be the CEO. Asking a very tough question about culture to me, and I can represent anybody at Acme Corp. We'll just call it Acme Corp or whatever it may be. I can represent anybody, and in my response, I'll try and clarify who I am. But these are tough questions the CEO should be asking about culture, about the organization, and to kind of help them, navigate and enforce.
Mm-hmm. So I did a little cheating before this conversation, and I asked my AI tool, what would a CEO want to ask about culture? And interestingly enough, because you and I spoke about this, but we didn't share our questions earlier this week, but we talked about what are the nuggets we want to give for this call, because that's something that's really important to us as we deliver these calls, that we deliver important nuggets to those CEOs or CXOs listening to this call. And I feel like my AI tool was listening to that, because it said the most strategic CEOs don't just assess culture, they actively shape it through intentional questioning, listening, and modeling desired behaviors. And I think that's a key nugget. And so a lot of my questions are actually around that. So my first question is what are the unwritten rules that currently exist in our organization that are shaping the culture we don't want?
Very good question. And, allow me, with these questions, I anticipate we're going to need some time to kind of think through. So the unwritten rules that are shaping cultures that we don't want.
Mm-hmm.
Very good question. So unwritten rules shaping culture that we don't want. And I'm thinking through my previous experiences at various organizations. Unwritten rules that are shaping culture that we don't want. I think one, I think, and this is, I'll give this answer, but as I think, as we go through the session, I might have a deeper answer. But I think an obvious one that is shaping culture that we don't want to shape, but it's kind of innocuous, right? I think employee surveys. That don't get action shape culture in a way that we don't want. And I think it's a common issue where organizations kind of in a check the box way, it's kind of more robotic, right? For a lot of organizations, it's, we're going to do our semi-annual employee survey. We do it. That's just the thing we do. We're going to collect a bunch of feedback. We're at the edges, may try and do a few initiatives here or there, but not really do a good job of communicating what actions we're taking, or competing priorities will take over and we just don't follow through. The effect of that, basically what you're adding to your culture is we don't listen. And so actions speak louder than words. You've been given words as feedback and actions did not follow. And that impacts culture. And I think it's a low-hanging fruit, but it's very visible, right? But it's one of those things that I think it's common, a lot more common than needs to be. So I'd say that.
Mm-hmm. I love that.
Anything you want to add to that? I mean,
I think this is an interesting question and one that I don't think we ask enough. And it might be an interesting exercise to do with your executive team to kind of put the mirror up of what are we doing as a leadership team that's creating these unwritten rules that we don't want? But what are we doing in our organizations? What are our leaders below us doing to create those unwritten rules? It might be an interesting exercise for organizations that are building that intentional culture to ask those questions. It's a hard question. And I've been having conversations with leaders and executives over the last couple of weeks and talking about culture and building an intentional culture. And some of that conversation is you have to call the baby ugly. And some of them are oh, don't tell the CEO it's their fault. Don't do that, right? And so it's a hard conversation to do. And if you're sitting with the CEO and the CEO is asking, what are we doing to create these unwritten rules that's driving a culture we don't want? And if the CEO is doing it, you have to have a culture that allows your executive team to say, time out, you CEO are doing this one thing.
Big time confronting the CEO, right? is there a culture where you can confront the C and hold the CEO accountable?
Yeah.
Because sometimes, CEOs are human too. They, as much as we'd like to think the CEO has all the answers, they mess up, or, and they're usually the least to get harsh feedback back. And so, a lot of unproductive behavior that can come from a CEO it may be allowed to continue because of that authority position. So it's to your point, Michelle, it's super important to have a culture where you can confront the CEO, of course, in a respectful manner, but that needs to happen. Yeah. So I think that's another really good response to that question is, do you have a culture that can confront the CEO?
Did I ever tell you my clicker story?
No.
It's not even my story, but I've taken it with me. I probably learned this like 10 years ago, if not more, just to show my age. And I learned it in a leadership training years and years ago, and I've just carried it with me because I think it's such a wonderful story where a leader took a 360. I don't know who this leader was, but he was a high leader in an organization. He took a 360 review, and it wasn't good. And he went to his team, and his team was terrified after he got the results that they were all going to be fired. And he went to them and said, I want to change. It sounds like I'm not a good leader and I want to change, but I'm not self-aware. I'm not aware I'm doing this behavior. So I want you guys to tell me, and I know it's not going to be easy, right? I know you did this 360, and that was probably very hard for you to do. So he gave them all the dog training clickers, those little clicker things you use when you're training your dog. And he said, when you see me doing this behavior, you click it. And that's just going to tell me I'm doing the behavior. And he goes, you can hide under your desk and click it. You can click it and run. You can hide behind a door and click it. You can click it in my ear and run. Like whatever you need to do, just click it so I know the behavior. You can click it under the table so I don't even see. And so people started doing that and clicking it without him seeing it. And he started to recognize the behavior, because sometimes we make faces like we're saying something, but our face is saying something different, right? And so he started to learn that what he was saying and how he was behaving were contradicting each other. And he started to learn that behavior was like destroying his leadership ability. And he learned to change over time. And people learned to give him feedback because they learned he could take it. But at first it was very scary, and he had to create that safe space for them. We don't all use dog clickers, but you have to create that space for people and be able to like take the feedback. And it's just a story that I love to share because it shows like people can change it. And sometimes we're not aware. And I think in a CEO seat, people think you should have all the answers. And I think sometimes we want to think we have all the answers, but we don't. And we're human and we make mistakes, and it's okay. And I think having an exercise like that of saying, tell me where we're misstepping, tell me where we're making mistakes, tell me where the breakdown is. Even if I did it as the CEO, I think we'll start to, it's kind of like having that clicker.
Yep. That's good on that CEO for doing that, right? Like that shows quite a bit of humility as well, right? Like that. But it goes to show you, like, CEOs are human too, but with that authority position, without that safe space to get that feedback, it just won't come naturally. And so that's a good one.
All right. What do you have for me?
All right. You got your seatbelt on.
Got my seatbelt on.
All right. So, I'm CEO asking this question. What is a widespread issue that is likely affecting the workforce but is not talked about?
That is a good one. A widespread issue that's affecting the workforce that's not talked about.
And I did a little cheating myself because this is inspired by a conversation I had yesterday. But I'll add some color on my view on that too. But would love your experience and perspective.
I would say one of the things, there's probably a few things, but one of the things I think comes to the top of my mind is psychological health and safety. And I think it's stronger in certain races and sexes too. Like if you're a white male, I think it's even harder to talk about. Like you have to be stronger for some reason. I don't know. Like, you're not allowed to talk about your feelings at work. And so like you have to come to work. I remember when I was young in my career, I don't do this anymore, so I've changed. But I remember new hire orientation, like I would say, leave your problems at the door. And like, that's so unrealistic. Like, you can't do that. Like, you can't. I know if I have a bad day at home, I'm having a bad day at work, right? It just, you can't, you can't just take it and throw it behind the wall and leave it there. And you can't go to your manager and say, boss person, I'm only at 50% today. Some workplaces you can, and it's acceptable. And I think bravo, right? But I think also for women too, it's very hard to do. And I think also, I think it shows weakness for some people more than others. So and I'm sure there's studies on that I just don't know, but I just feel like there's people that you can't talk about it because then you're considered weak or not strong enough. So I have an example. I had a CRO at work. She was female. We were in a boardroom preparing a presentation the board wasn't in there, but we were in a boardroom. We were preparing a presentation for the board, and there were a lot of moving parts, and it was a pretty big presentation. And she had a few things she had to update. Not a big deal. A few things she had to update. Her mom was really sick, and she just started crying. And she started crying, and the CEO did the right thing and said, I'm really sorry. Like, what do you need? Blah, 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 blah. And say, why don't you go home and just breathe, right? And then the CEO and CFO came into my office after she left and said, she's not going to cut it. And I think like those kinds of things need more work in the workplace. If that makes sense.
And I think you hit it on the head, Michelle. Like, people are going through real life issues, right? Like life, life happens, and you'd be surprised how many people show up to the office and dealing with very heavy personal and life stuff. And they put that burden of performance still with peers that may or may not be going through as tough issues, but we all have waves, right? The workforce has a wave, right? There are people who are having great personal lives and things are, they're able to kind of not bring anything from that or bring positive energy from that, into the workplace. And there are people that are having tough things happen in their personal lives. And they've got to, find ways to manage that. But the workforce is going through waves all the time. And being aware of that, and finding creative ways to, when necessary, lean on other parts of the organization that may be at the lower part of the wave to help compensate for people who are maybe at the higher part of the wave. Just kind of recognize that that's a natural thing for a large body of people to be going through, right? But I like that answer quite a bit. In the theme of things that are happening in the personal life that may be affecting work life, just to add to your response, Michelle, I had a great conversation yesterday about substance abuse and how in benefits programs, a lot is covered, and substance abuse, help with recovery from or kind of dealing with substance abuse is covered in Michelle, you'll know a lot more about this than I do, but there is some coverage and there is some help in benefits programs for that. But it's not really, I didn't know, I didn't really know a lot about that. So in my previous, roles in corporate, I've seen a lot of different things offered in benefits program, whether mental health, fertility, or just a variety of things. But I don't recall seeing anything about help with substance abuse. And so, people within the workforce that may be dealing with that, either directly or indirectly, maybe they have someone at home that's dealing with that. And one thing I learned yesterday as well from this conversation that I had with, he specializes in helping in workforces that, or like helping workforces kind of bring some light to it and kind of manage through it. But one thing I didn't know is that you as an employee, if you have a family member that's dealing with substance abuse or needs help, some benefits programs will provide coverage for that. But it's a topic that I think is still avoided in a lot of ways, or is not talked about as much, at least in my experience, and just kind of in my days in at corporate, I just didn't hear a lot about those offerings. So I think that's another quote unquote widespread issue, or potentially widespread issue within a workforce that isn't talked about as much as I think it should be.
Yeah, we had a Rebels call on that, and I also think that's another piece of psychological health and safety too. Of like, it's not safe to bring that stuff up, right? There are organizations that are recovery friendly workplace, and I think that falls into that. If you're a recovery friendly workplace, like, it's much safer to bring that up and say, I'm struggling today. I'm having a tough day. I need some extra assistance. I need to leave work early to go to a meeting. And you have a boss that goes, okay, that's great. Go for it. Why don't you leave now so you can go get ready for it? So you have an extra minute in your car to breathe before you walk in. Like, I think that compassion is so great. And I think there's, we all bring challenges to the table, and I wasn't trying to call out one group or another, but I think like it's so hard, whatever you bring to the table, whatever diversity set you bring to the table, it's so hard to bring that. Like, if you're bringing, any kind of like mental health issue to the table on top of that, it's so much harder at work. And we don't have a safe place at work. And that's part of your culture, right?
Michelle, a question came to my mind, and I don't want to, so I'm going to ask it, but we can move to the question that you may have for me. But I think it's an interesting one, and maybe we need to do a round 2 of this. But it just came to mind in kind of the theme. I'm taking the other extreme side of this. So I think a workplace where we're being more aware, we're being more respectful of the different life events that people are going through, very real stuff. But at the other end of things, if we do create a culture where it is more open and friendly to people bring their issues, or helping other people be aware of the issues that they're going through, how do we also safeguard against the extreme of that, right? Where we're building a culture that's too fragile, right? Hey, I stubbed my toe. I'm having a tough day today. And by the way, I didn't break my toe. I just kind of stubbed it. As just kind of like a hypothetical. So how do we balance with creating a culture that you're able to bring real issues, be, hey, I'm at 80% or I'm at 70%, I may or may not give details, so on and so forth, versus, hey, I stubbed my toe, I'm at 80%, right? How do we not create a culture of fragility?
I think there's a big difference between you're crying, it's because you're female and you can't handle it, or it's because, you can't handle the workload, it's because of blah, 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 right? You're stressed, or it's because of whatever, to, oh, I'm having a bad day because I stubbed my toe. It's a wide girth there between those two issues, right? And I think that's why organizations steer away from this, is because of the fear of that, of we're going to have all of these people that just want to take a day off because they stubbed their toe. Realistically, like if somebody comes into my office and said, I'm having a really shitty day because I stubbed my toe, I'd be like, that sucks. I'm sorry to hear that. Like, it hurts when you stub your toe. Do you want me to get you a glass of water? I'll get you a glass of water. Like, let's get back to work. I'm fine if somebody wants to tell me that, but we're not going to lose sleep over it. But if I have an employee who's calling out of work because they want to commit suicide, they're not telling me, like that I want, like, that's something I want to know. Like, and that's something like I want a culture where people are comfortable calling me and saying like, Michelle, I can't get myself to work today because I've had a really tough night or a really bad night. And those are the things that's the culture. When you have a psychologically safe culture, those are the things you want to capture, that you have an employee that feels so comfortable coming to you saying, you know, I have an AA meeting today that I need to go to. Or, you know, I had a tough day. Because sometimes when you're recovering, an argument can set you off, right? A family argument. Like, I've had a tough day. There's a pop-up AA meeting I need to go to at lunch. Is it okay if I go to this meeting and take an hour instead of a half hour, and then I'll work an extra half hour at the back end? And when you're willing to go the extra mile for an employee, they're willing to go the extra mile for you. And so having that open dialogue is much more important than worrying about the employee that stubbed their toe.
Yep.
I'm not a believer in making policies for the outliers, right? I'm a believer in making policies that align with the culture you want. And don't worry about the outliers. Like, you can deal with the outliers. They are going to pop up every once in a while, but like, deal with the culture that you want and wrap the policies around that.
Very well put. Very well put. I didn't mean to throw in a second one in there. So Michelle.
It was a good follow-up question, because I think people worry about that. Like, oh, well, the what if. So I'm very, very I'm overly optimistic, and I've worked with CFOs that tend to be much more risk averse. And so we've had these conversations.
Nice.
So I'm like, but you know, it's people, and we should care about people. And like, how many people have taken a day off because they've stubbed their toe? Like, in my career, I mean, maybe they have, and I just don't know. But like, a lot of people, like, if they need a day because it's a mental health day, whether they stub their toe or not, like, take it. Like, if you just need a day to meditate because you've had a tough day, we're not doing brain surgery. Nobody's going to, I mean, maybe in some organizations, they will. Nobody's going to die.
Most of the organization we're talking about is more.
Like, it's better that you do the right thing.
True. No, that's very well put. Very well put. And, you know, true, right? You're going to have to trust, again, your culture, and employees are going to have to be respectful, right? In making sure that they're creating space, that contract, that unwritten contract is upheld, right? People aren't just stubbing their toe and bring that forth. But to your point, those are more often than times than not edge cases, right? And so I do agree with that, where it may cause an oversized concern, you know, some of these edge cases, but you know, no, I think that's very well put. Michelle, you can pepper me with 2 questions, just to retaliate.
This one we've kind of talked about in the past, but I still think it's a valuable question. So, where do we see cultural friction or misalignment?
Where do we see cultural?
Yeah, we talked about friction, right?
Yeah, absolutely. We had a great session about that. Where do we see cultural friction and misalignment?
Mm-hmm.
I think very commonly within the C-suite itself. You know, you'd be surprised. You know, I don't think, and it's interesting because leadership sometimes will go through, you know, long plans of like strategic planning and so on and so forth. But things, as the year kind of goes by, it's either this heavy emphasis on administrative work. Like, I need to prepare this deck just to have this 30, like I'll spend 5 hours preparing a deck for, you know, this 30-minute meeting, and I have a 5-minute part of it. And I see a lot of, like, in my, just kind of what I've seen out there, there's a lot of that, and none of that helps with alignment. So there's a lot of there's a lot of activity, but very few of that translates to true alignment. And typically what you see is that there's usually some kind of drift that happens within, you know, the C-suite. They just start to take different initiatives and priorities that they think is important, but that isn't aligned. And so again, that's one of the things that the CEO is responsible for, is making sure there's a strong pulse of the work that's being done within the organization, making sure that is truly aligned with the strategy. And I think if organizations took a deeper dive, they'd find that a good chunk of the work that is being done within an organization is oftentimes just irrelevant to the broader story, the broader picture, and the broader direction. And it's a form of waste. So I think one place it happens quite a bit is within the C-suite itself, within leadership. So, guarding against that. And I think to find where else it's happening, I think having a robust process that asks, questions at the edges, feedback at the edges is gonna be the way that you suss that out mostly. So hopefully that's a complete answer.
Yep. I love it. There is friction and misalignment. I think a lot of that sometimes happens too, within the leadership level when you have, especially as you start to grow, right? And you're growing quickly, you have to make sure those leaders are all aligned. And when they start to behave differently to your values or your intentional values or culture, that's when you start to have that friction too. So I think we're good. I want to make sure we have our nuggets too. So we've talked about CEOs need to ask tough questions if they want to maintain a intentional culture. CEOs own culture. They need to make sure they're accountable for that they are the ones that are holding people accountable to it. Culture will happen whether they let it or not. So if it's the culture you want, you have to be intentional about it. Otherwise, it's going to be the culture you don't want.
And I think a great way to start is exactly what we did, is asking those really tough questions and making sure that you get the answers, right? Continuously, not just in one point in time. So I agree.
Good. I've got a bunch of other questions. I'm going to throw them in the notes and see what other people in the comments, see what other people say.
Yeah, I would love to see in the comments. Yeah, I'll throw some of mine in there as well.
Sounds good. So until next week, cheers, everyone.
Thank you so much, Michelle. As always, thank you, everyone.
You've just experienced another episode of The CXO and CHRO Walk into a Bar, where we share insights at the intersection of talent and revenue. Thank you for joining us. Please join us next week at noon Eastern for more strategic content to help you scale your business. You can follow us on LinkedIn and on YouTube for additional content or episodes you may have missed. The links will be in the comments section. If you'd like more information or to schedule time with Michelle or Dominique, follow the link in the comments section to book time on their calendar. Until next week, cheers.